While Cortez was talking to the ambassadors of Montezuma, and he wanted to take some rest, for he was ill with fever, they came to him to tell him that Captain Xicotenga was arriving with many other caciques and captains, all clothed in white and red cloaks, which was the livery of Xicotenga, approaching in a very peaceful manner, and was bringing with him in his company about 50 chieftains. When Xicotenga reached Cortez's quarters, he paid him the greatest respect by his obeisance, and ordered much copal to be burned. Cortez, with the greatest show of affection, seated him by his side, and Xicotenga said that he came on behalf of his father, and of Maseascasi and all the caciques, and Commonwealth of Tlaxcala, to pray Cortez to admit them to our friendship, and that he came to render obedience to our king and lord, and to ask pardon for having taken up arms and made war upon us. That this had been done because they did not know who we were, and they had taken it for certain that we had come on behalf of their enemy Montezuma, and for that reason had endeavored to defend themselves and their country, and were obliged to show fight. He said that they were very poor people, who possessed neither gold nor silver, nor precious stones, nor cotton cloth, nor even salt to eat, because Montezuma gave them no opportunity to go out and search for it, and that although their ancestors possessed some gold and precious stones, they had been given to Montezuma on former occasions when, to save themselves from destruction, they had made peace or a truce, and this had been in times long past. So that if they had nothing to give now, we must pardon them for it, for poverty and not the want of goodwill was the cause of it. He made many complaints of Montezuma and his allies, who were all hostile to them and made war on them, but they had defended themselves very well. Now they had thought to do the same against us, but they could not do it, although they had gathered against us 3 times with all their warriors, and we must be invincible. And when they found this out about our persons, they wished to become friends with us, and the vassals of the great prince, the Emperor Don Carlos, for they felt sure that in our company they, and their women and children, would be guarded and protected, and would not live in dread of the Mexican traitors. And he said many other words, placing themselves and their city at our disposal. Xicotenga was tall, broad-shouldered, and well-made. His face was long, pock-marked, and coarse. He was about 35 years old, and of a dignified deportment. Cortez thanked him very courteously, in a most flattering manner, and said that he would accept them as vassals of our king and lord, and as our own friends. Then Xicotenga begged us to come to his city, for all the caciques, elders, and priests were waiting to receive us with great rejoicing. Cortez replied that he would go there promptly, and would start at once, were it not for some negotiations which he was carrying on with the great Montezuma, and that he would come after he had dispatched the messengers. Then Cortez spoke somewhat more sharply and severely about the attacks they had made on us, both by day and night, adding that as it could not now be amended, he would pardon it. Let them see to it that the peace we now were granting them was an enduring one, without any change, for otherwise he would kill them and destroy their city, and that he, Xicotenga, should not expect further talk about peace, but only of war. When Xicotenga and all the chieftains who had come with him heard these words, they answered one and all that the peace would be firm and true, and that to prove it, they would all remain with us as hostages. The Mexican ambassadors were present during all these discussions, and heard all the promises that were made, and the conclusion of peace weighed on them heavily, for they fully understood that it boded them no good. And when Xicotenga had taken his leave, these ambassadors of Montezuma half laughingly asked Cortez whether he believed any of those promises which were made on behalf of all Tlaxcala, alleging that it was all a trick which deserved no credence, and the words were those of traitors and deceivers, that their object was to attack and kill us as soon as they had us within their city in a place where they could do so in safety, that we should bear in mind how often they had put forth all their strength to destroy us, and had failed to do so, and had lost many killed and wounded, and that now they offered a sham peace so as to avenge themselves. Cortez answered them with a brave face that their alleged belief that such was the case did not trouble him, for even if it were true, he would be glad of it so as to punish them, the Tlaxcalans, by taking their lives, that it did not matter to him whether they attacked him by day or by night, in the city or in the open. He did not mind one way or the other, and it was for the purpose of seeing whether they were telling the truth that he was determined to go to their city. The ambassadors, seeing that he had made up his mind, begged him to wait 6 days in our camp, as they wished to send 2 of their companions with a message to their lord Montezuma, and said that they would return with a reply within 6 days. To this Cortez agreed, on the one hand because, as I have said, he was suffering from fever, and on the other because, although when the ambassadors had made these statements he had appeared to attach no importance to them, he thought that there was a chance of their being true, and that until there was greater certainty of peace, they were of a nature requiring much consideration. As at the time that this peace was made, the towns all along the road that we had traversed from our Villarica de Veracruz were allied to us and friendly, Cortez wrote to Juan de Escalante, who, as I have said, remained in the town to finish building the fort, and had under his command the 60 old or sick soldiers who had been left behind. In these letters he told them of the great mercies which our Lord Jesus Christ had vouchsafed to us in the victories which we had gained in our battles and encounters since we had entered the province of Tlaxcala, which had now sued for peace with us, and asked that all of them would give thanks to God for it. He also told them to see to it that they always kept on good terms with our friends in the towns of the Totonacs, and he told him to send at once 2 jars of wine which had been left behind, buried in a certain marked place in his lodgings, and some sacred wafers for the Mass, which had been brought from the island of Cuba, for these which we had brought on this expedition were already finished. These letters were most welcome, and Escalante wrote in reply to say what had happened in the town, and all that was asked for arrived very quickly. About this time we set up a tall and sumptuous cross in our camp, and Cortez ordered the Indians of Zumpanzingo and those who dwelt in the houses near our camp to whitewash it, and it was beautifully finished. I must cease writing about this, and return to our new friends the caciques of Tlaxcala, who, when they saw that we did not go to their city, gave themselves to our camp, and brought poultry and tuna, which were then in season. Each one brought some of the food which he had in his house, and gave it to us with the greatest goodwill, without asking anything in return, and they always begged Cortez to come with them soon to their city. As we had promised to wait 6 days for the return of the Mexicans, Cortez put off the Tlaxcalans with fair speeches. When the time expired, according to their word, 6 chieftains, men of great importance, arrived from Mexico, and brought a rich present from the great Montezuma, consisting of valuable gold jewels, wrought in various shapes, worth 3,000 pesos in gold, and 200 pieces of cloth richly worked with feathers and other patterns. When they offered this present, the chieftain said to Cortez that their lord Montezuma was delighted to hear of our success, but that he prayed him most earnestly on no account to go with the people of Tlaxcala to their town, nor to place any confidence in them, that they wished to get him there to rob him of his gold and cloth, for they were very poor, and did not possess a decent cotton cloak among them, and that the knowledge that Montezuma looked on us as friends, and was sending us gold and jewels and cloth, would still more induce the Tlaxcalans to rob us. Cortez received the present with delight, and said that he thanked them for it, and would repay their lord Montezuma with good works, and if he should perceive that the Tlaxcalans had that in mind against which Montezuma had sent them to warn him, they would pay for it by having all their lives taken. But he felt sure they would be guilty of no such villainy, and he still meant to go and see what they would do. Cortez begged the Mexican ambassadors to wait for 3 days for the reply of their prince, as he had at present to deliberate and decide about the past hostilities and the peace which was now offered, and the ambassadors said that they would wait. When the old caciques from all Tlaxcala saw that we did not come to their city, they decided to come to us, some in litters, others in hammocks or carried on men's backs, and others on foot. These were the caciques already mentioned by me, named Maziascazi, Xicotenga the Elder, Guaxolocingo, Chichimequetecla, and Tecapecanaca of Topayanco. They arrived at our camp with great company of chieftains, and with every sign of respect made 3 obeisances to Cortez and to all of us, and they burned copal and touched the ground with their hands and kissed it. And Xicotenga the Elder began to address Cortez in the following words: Malinche, Malinche, We have sent many times to implore you to pardon us for having attacked you, and to state our excuse, that we did it to defend ourselves from the hostility of Montezuma and his powerful forces, for we believed that you belonged to his party and were allied to him. If we had known what we know now, we should not only have gone out to receive you on the roads with supplies of food, but would even have had them swept for you, and we would even have gone to you to the sea where you keep your acales, which are the ships. Now that you have pardoned us, what I and all these caciques have come to request is that you will come at once with us to our city, where we will give you all that we possess, and will serve you with our persons and property. Look to it, Malinche, that you do not decide otherwise, or we will leave you at once, for we fear that perchance these Mexicans may have told you some of the falsehoods and lies they are used to tell about us. Do not believe them nor listen to them, for they are false in everything, and we well know that it is on their account that you have not wished to come to our city." Cortez answered them with cheerful mien, and said that it was well known, many years before we had come to these countries, what a good people they were, and that it was on this account that he wondered at their attacking us. He said that the Mexicans who were there with us merely were awaiting a reply which he was sending to the Lord Montezuma. He thanked them heartily for what they said about our going at once to their city, and for the food which they were continually sending, and for their other civilities, and he would repay them by good deeds. He said that he would already have set out for their city, if he had had anyone to carry the tpushques, that is, the cannon. As soon as they heard these words, the Tlaxcalans were so pleased that one could see it in their faces, and they said, "So this is the reason why you have delayed and never mentioned it?" And in less than half an hour they provided over 500 Indian carriers. The next day, early in the morning, we began our march along the road to the capital of Tlaxcala. The messengers of Montezuma had already begged Cortez that they might go with us to see how affairs were settled at Tlaxcala, and that we would dispatch them from there, and that they should be quartered in his own lodgings, so as not to receive any insults, for, as they said, they feared such from the Tlaxcalans. Before going on any further, I wish to say that in all the towns we had passed through, and in others where they had heard of us, Cortez was called Malinche, and so I will call him Malinche from now henceforth in all the accounts of conversations which were held with any of the Indians. The reason why he was given this name is that Doña Marina, our interpreter, was always in his company, particularly when any ambassadors arrived, and she spoke to them in the Mexican language, so that they gave Cortez the name of Marina's captain, and for short, Malinche. I also wish to say that from the time we entered the territory of Tlaxcala until we set out for the city, 24 days had elapsed, and we entered the city on the 23rd September, 1519. When the caciques saw that our baggage was on the way to their city, they at once went on ahead to see that everything was ready for our reception, and that our quarters were decked with garlands. When we arrived within a quarter of a league of the city, these same caciques who had gone on ahead and came out to receive us, and brought with them their sons and nephews and many of the leading inhabitants, each group of kindred and clan and party by itself. There were 4 parties in Tlaxcala, without counting that of Tecapicanica, the lord of Topayanco, which made 5. Their followers also came from all parts of the country, wearing their different liveries, and although they were made of henequen, for there was no cotton to be obtained, they were very fine and beautifully embroidered and painted. Then came the priests from all parts of the province, and they were very numerous on account of the great oratories which they possess, the places where they keep their idols and other sacrifices. These priests carried braziers with live coals and incense, and fumigated all of us, and some of them were clothed in very long garments like fur cloaks, and these were white, and they wore hoods over them, which looked like those used by canons, and their hair was very long and tangled, so that it could not be parted unless it were cut, and it was clotted with blood which oozed from their ears, which on that day they had cut by way of sacrifice, and they lowered their heads as a sign of humility when they saw us. The nails on their fingers were very long, and we heard it said that these priests were very pious, and led good lives. Many of the chieftains came near to Cortez and accompanied him, and when we entered the town there was not space in the streets and on the roofs for all the Indian men and women with happy faces who came out to see us. They brought us about 20 cones made of sweet-scented native roses of various colors, and gave them to Cortez and to other soldiers whom they thought were captains, especially to the horsemen. When we arrived at some fine courts where our quarters were, Xicotenga the Elder and Maciascasi took Cortez by the hand and led him into his lodging. For each one of us they had prepared a bed of matting such as they use, and sheets of henequen. Our friends whom we had brought from Zempoala and Xocotlan were lodged near to us, and Cortez asked that the messengers from the great Montezuma might also be given quarters close to his lodging. Although we could see clearly that we were in a land where they were well disposed towards us and were quite at peace, we did not cease to be very much on the alert, as was always our custom, and it appears that one captain whose duty it was to station the scouts and spies and watchmen said to Cortez, "It seems, sir, that the people are very peaceful, and we do not need so many guards, nor to be so circumspect as you are accustomed to be." Cortez replied, "Well, gentlemen, I can myself see all that you have brought to my notice, but it is a good custom always to be prepared, and although these may be very good people, we must not trust to their peacefulness, but must be as alert as we should be if they intended to make war on us, and we saw them coming on to the attack. And whether it was done in good faith or bad, we must remember that the great Montezuma has sent to warn us." Xicotenga the Elder and Maciascasi were greatly annoyed with Cortez, and said to him through our interpreters, "Malinche, either you take us for enemies, or you show signs in what we see you doing that you have no confidence in us, or in the peace which you promised to us, and we promised to you. And we say this to you because we see that you keep watch, and traveled along the road all ready for action, in the same way as when you attacked our squadrons. And we believe that you, Malinche, do this on account of the treasons and abominations which the Mexicans had told you in secret so as to turn you against us. See to it that you do not believe them, for you are established here, and we will give you all that you desire, even ourselves and our children, and we are ready to die for you, so you can demand as hostages whatever you may wish." Cortez and all of us marveled at the courtesy and affection with which they spoke, and Cortez answered them that he had always believed them, and there was no need of hostages. It was enough to note their goodwill, and that as to being on the alert, it was always our custom, and they must not be offended at it. When this conversation was over, other chiefs arrived with a great supply of poultry and maize bread, and tuna and other fruits and vegetables which the country produced, and supplied the camp very liberally, and during the 20 days that we stayed there was always more than enough to eat. Early next day, Cortez ordered an altar to be put up and mass to be said, for now we had both the wine and the sacred wafers. It was the priest Juan de Oz who said the mass, for the Padre de la Merced was ill with fever and very feeble. There were present Maciascasi and Xicotenga the Elder and other caciques. When mass was over, Cortez entered his lodging with some of us soldiers who usually accompanied him, and the 2 old caciques and Xicotenga said to him that they wished to bring him a present, and Cortez showed much affection to them, and said that they should bring it whenever they wished. So some mats were at once spread out and covered with a cloth, and they brought 6 or 7 trifles of gold, and some stones of small value, and some loads of henequen cloth. It was all very poor, and not even worth $20, and when it had been presented, those caciques said, laughing, "Malinche, we know well enough that as what we have to give you is so small, you will not receive it with good grace. We have already sent to tell you that we are poor, and that we own neither gold nor riches, and the reason of it is that these traitors and evil Mexicans and Montezuma, who is now their lord, have taken all that we once possessed. When we asked them for peace or a truce to prevent their making war on us, so do not consider the small value of the gift, but accept it with a good grace as the gift of friends and servants which we will be to you." Then they brought, separately, a large supply of food. Cortez accepted it most cheerfully, and said to them that he valued it more as coming from their hands with the good will with which it was offered, than he would a house full of grains of gold brought by others, and it was in this spirit that he accepted it, and he displayed much affection towards them. It appears that it had been arranged among all the caciques to give us from among their daughters and nieces the most beautiful of the maidens who were ready for marriage. And Xicotenga the elder said, Malinche, so that you may know more clearly our goodwill towards you and our desire to content you in everything, we wish to give you our daughters to be your wives, so that you may have children by them, for we wish to consider you as brothers, as you are so good and valiant. I have a very beautiful daughter who has not been married, and I wish to give her to you. So also Maciascaze and all the other caciques said that they would bring their daughters, and that we should accept them as wives, and they made many other speeches and promises. Throughout the day, Maciascaze and Xicotenga the elder never left Cortez' immediate neighborhood, as Xicotenga the elder was blind from old age, and he felt Cortez all over his head and face and beard, and over all his body. Cortez replied to them that, as to the gift of the women, he and all of us were very grateful and would repay them with good deeds as time went on. The Padre de la Merced was present, and Cortez said to him, Señor Padre, it seems to me that this would be a good time to make an attempt to induce these caciques to give up their idols and their sacrifices, for they will do anything we tell them to do on account of the great fear they have of the Mexicans. The friar replied, Sir, that is true, but let us leave the matter until they bring their daughters, and then there will be material to work upon. And your honor can say that you do not wish to accept them until they give up sacrifices. If that succeeds, good. If not, we shall do our duty. The next day, the same old caciques came and brought with them 5 beautiful Indian maidens, and for Indians they were very good-looking and well adorned, and each of the Indian maidens brought another Indian girl as her servant, and all were the daughters of caciques. And Xicotenga said to Cortez, Malinche, this is my daughter who has never been married, and is a maiden. Take her for your own. And he gave her to him by the hand. And let the others be given to the captains. Cortez expressed his thanks, and with every appearance of gratification, said that he accepted them, took them as our own, but that for the present they should remain in the care of their parents. The chiefs asked him why he would not take them now, and Cortez replied that he wished first to do the will of our God, our Lord, and that for which our Lord the King had sent us, which was to induce them to do away with their idols, and no longer kill and sacrifice human beings, and to lead them to believe in that which we believed, that is, in one true God. And he told them much more touching our holy faith, and in truth he expressed it very well, for Doña Marina and Aguilar, our interpreters, were already so expert at it that they explained it very clearly. He also told them that if they wished to be our brothers and to have true friendship with us, so that we should willingly accept their daughters and take them, as they said, for our wives, that they should at once give up their evil idols, and believe in and worship our Lord God, and things would prosper with them, and when they died their souls would go to heaven to enjoy glory everlasting. But if they went on making sacrifices, as they were accustomed to do to their idols, they would be led to hell, where they would burn forever in live flames. And what they replied to it all is as follows. Malinche, we have already understood from you before now, and we thoroughly believe that this God of yours and this great lady are very good. But look you, you have only just come to our homes. As time goes on, we shall understand your beliefs much more clearly, and see that they are, and will do what is right. But how can you ask us to give up our teules, which for many years our ancestors have held to be gods, and have made sacrifices to them and have worshipped them? Even if we who are old men might wish to do it to please you, what would our priests say, and all our neighbors, and the youths and children throughout the province? They would rise against us, especially as the priests have already consulted the greatest of our teules, and he told them not to forget the sacrifice of men, and all the rites they were used to practice. Otherwise the gods would destroy the whole province with famine, pestilence, and war. Thus they spoke, and gave us their answer that we should not trouble to talk to them on that subject again, for they were not going to leave off making sacrifices, even if they were killed for it. When we heard that reply, which they gave so honestly and without fear, the Padre de la Merced, who was a wise man and a theologian, said, Sir, do not attempt to press them further on this subject, for it is not just to make them Christians by force, and I would not wish that you should do what we did in Zempoala, that is, destroy their idols, until they have some knowledge of our holy faith. Furthermore, 2 gentlemen, namely Juan Velasquez de Leon and Francisco de Lugo, spoke to Cortez and said, "The padre is right in what he says. You have fulfilled your duty with what you have done, and do not touch again on this matter when speaking to these caciques." And so the subject dropped. What we induced the caciques to do by entreaty was at once to clear out one of the queues, which was close by and had been recently built, and after removing the idols, to clean it and whitewash it so that we could place a cross in it and the image of Our Lady, and this they promptly did. Then Mass was said there, and the caciques were baptized. The daughters of the blind Xicotenga was given the name of Doña Luisa, and Cortez took her by the hand and gave her to Pedro de Alvarado, and said to Xicotenga that he to whom he gave her was his brother and his captain, and that he should be pleased at it, as she would be well treated by him. And Xicotenga was contented that it should be so. The daughter or niece of Maziascazi was named Doña Elvira, and she was very beautiful, and it seems to me that she was given to Juan Velasquez de Leon. The others were given baptismal names, always with the title of nobility, Doña, and Cortez gave them to Gonzalo de Sandoval and Cristobal de Olid and Alonso de Avila. When this had been done, Cortez told them the reason why he put up 2 crosses, and that it was because their idols were afraid of them, and that wherever we were encamped or wherever we slept, they were placed in the roads, and at all this they were quite content. Before I go any further, I wish to say about that cacica, the daughter of Xicotenga, who was named Doña Luisa, and was given to Pedro de Alvarado, that when they gave her to him, all the greater part of Tlaxcala paid reverence to her, and gave her presents, and looked on her as their mistress. And Pedro de Alvarado, who was then a bachelor, had a son by her named Don Pedro, and a daughter named Doña Leonor, who is now the wife of Don Francisco de la Cueva, a nobleman and a cousin of the Duke of Albuquerque, who had by her 4 or 5 sons, very good gentlemen. Cortez then took those caciques aside and questioned them very fully about Mexican affairs. Xicotenga, as he was the best informed and a great chieftain, took the lead in talking, and from time to time he was helped by Maziascazi, who was also a great chief. He said that Montezuma had such great strength in warriors that when he wished to capture a great city or make a raid on a province, he could place 150,000 men in the field, and this they knew well from the experience of the wars and hostilities they had had with them for more than 100 years past. Cortez asked them how it was that with so many warriors, as they said, came down on them, that they had never been entirely conquered. They answered that although the Mexicans sometimes defeated them and killed them, and carried off many of their vassals for sacrifice, many of the enemy were also left dead on the field, and others were made prisoners, and they never could come so secretly that they did not get some warning, and that when they knew of their approach they mustered all their forces, and with the help of the people of Huetzotzingo, they defended themselves and made counterattacks. That is, all the provinces which had been raided by Montezuma and placed under his rule were ill-disposed towards the Mexicans, and that as their inhabitants were carried off by the force to the wars, they did not fight with good will. Indeed, it was from these very men that they received warnings, and for this reason they had defended their country to the best of their ability. The place from which the most continuous trouble came to them was a very great city a day's march distant, which is called Cholula, whose inhabitants were most treacherous. It was there that Montezuma secretly mustered his companies, and as it was nearby, they made their raids by night. Moreover, Maziascazi said that Montezuma kept garrisons of many warriors stationed in all the provinces, in addition to the great force he could bring from the city, and that all the provinces paid tribute of gold and silver, feathers, stones, cloth, and cotton, and Indian men and women for sacrifice, and others for servants, that he, Montezuma, was such a great prince that he possessed everything he could desire, that the houses where he dwelt were full of riches, and precious stones, and chalchuites, which he had robbed and taken by force from those who would not give them willingly, and that all the wealth of the country was in his hands. Then they spoke of the great fortifications of the city, and what the lake was like, and the depth of water, and about the causeways that gave access to the city, and the wooden bridges in each causeway, and how one can go in and out by water through the opening that there is in each bridge, and how when the bridges are raised one can be cut off between bridge and bridge and not be able to reach the city. How the greater part of the city was built in the lake, and that one could not pass from house to house except by drawbridges and canoes which they had ready. That all the houses were flat-roofed, and all the roofs were provided with parapets so that they could fight from them. They brought us pictures of the battles they had fought with the Mexicans painted on large Conquest, showing their manner of fighting. As our captain and all of us had already heard about all these caciques were telling us, we changed the subject and started them on another more profound, which was, how was it that they came to inhabit that land, and from what direction had they come? And how was it that they differed so much from and were so hostile to the Mexicans, seeing that their countries were so close to one another? They said that their ancestors had told them that in times past there had lived among them men and women of giant size with huge bones, and because they were very bad people of evil manners, that they had fought with them and killed them, and those of them who remained died off. So that we could see how huge and tall these people had been, they brought us a leg bone of one of them which was very thick, and the height of a man of ordinary stature, and that was the bone from the hip to the knee. I measured myself against it, and it was as tall as I am, although I am a fair size. They brought other pieces of bone like the first, but they were already eaten away and destroyed by the soil. We were all amazed at seeing those bones, and felt sure that there must have been giants in this country, and our Captain Cortez said to us that it would be well to send that great bone to Castile, so that His Majesty might see it. So we sent it with the first of our agents who went there. These caciques also told us that they had learnt from their forefathers that one of their idols, to which they paid the greatest devotion, had told them that men would come from distant lands in the direction of the rising sun to subjugate them and govern them, and that if we were those men, they were rejoiced at it, as we were so good and brave, and that when they made peace with us, they had borne in mind what their idols had said, and for this reason they had given us their daughters so as to obtain relations who would defend them against the Mexicans. When they had finished their discourse, we were all astounded, and said, could they possibly have spoken the truth? Then our Captain Cortez replied to them, and said that certainly we came from the direction of the sunrise, and that our Lord the King had sent us for this very purpose, that we should become as brothers to them, for he had heard of them, and that he prayed God to give us grace, so that by our hands and our intercession they would be saved, and we all said Amen. I feel bound to dwell on one other thing which they discussed with us, and that is the volcano near Huitzilopochtli, which at the time we were in Tlaxcala was throwing out much fire, much more than usual. Our Captain Cortez and all of us were greatly astonished, as we had never seen such a thing before. One of our captains, named Diego de Ordaz, was very anxious to go and see what sort of a thing it was, and asked leave of the general to ascend the mountain, and leave was given, and he even expressly ordered him to do it. He took with him 2 of our soldiers and certain Indian chiefs from Huitzilopochtli, and the chiefs that he took with him frightened him by saying that when one was halfway up Popocatépetl, for so the volcano is called, one could not endure the shaking of the ground, and the flames and stones and ashes which were thrown out of the mountain, and that they would not dare to ascend further than where stood the queues of the idols which are called the Tuiles of Popocatépetl. Nevertheless, Diego de Ordaz and his 2 companions went on up until they reached the summit, and the Indians who had accompanied them remained below and did not dare to make the ascent. It appears from what Ordaz and the 2 soldiers said afterwards, that as they ascended the volcano began to throw out great tongues of flame, and half-burnt stones of little weight, and a great quantity of ashes, and that the whole of the mountain range where the volcano stands was shaken, and that they stopped still without taking a step in advance for more than an hour, when they thought that the outburst had passed and not so much smoke and ashes were being thrown out. Then they climbed up to the mouth, which was very wide and round, and opened to the width of 1/4 of a league. From this summit could be seen the great city of Mexico, and the whole of the lake, and all the towns which were built in it. This volcano is distant 12 or 13 leagues from Mexico. Ordaz was delighted and astonished at the sight of Mexico and its cities, and after having had a good look at the view, he returned to Tlaxcala with his companions, and the Indians of Huitzilopochtli and of Tlaxcala looked on it as a deed of great daring. What he told, his story, to Captain Cortez and all of us, we were greatly astonished at, for, at that time, we had not seen nor heard of such things as we have today, when we know all about it, and many Spaniards, even some Franciscan friars, have made the ascent to the crater. When Diego de Orda went to Castile, he asked the king for it, the mountain, as his coat of arms, and his nephew, who lives at Puebla, now bears them. Since we have been settled in this land, we have never known the volcano to throw out so much fire, or make such a noise as it did when we first arrived, and it has even remained some years without throwing out any fire, up to the year 1539, when it threw up great flames and stones and ashes. I must tell how in this town of Tlaxcala we found wooden houses furnished with gratings, full of Indian men and women imprisoned in them, being fed up until they were fat enough to be sacrificed and eaten. These prisons we broke open and destroyed, and set free the prisoners who were in them, and these poor Indians did not dare go in any direction, only to stay there with us, and thus escape with their lives. From now on, in all the towns that we entered, the first thing our captain ordered to do was to break open those prisons and set free the prisoners. These prisons are common throughout the land, and when Cortez and all of us saw such great cruelty, he showed that he was very angry with the caciques of Tlaxcala, and they promised that from that time forth they would not kill and eat any more Indians in that way. I said to myself, of what benefit were all those promises, for as soon as we turned our heads, they would commit the same cruelties. When our captain remembered that we had already been restless in Tlaxcala for 17 days, and that we had heard so much said about the great wealth of Montezuma and his flourishing city, he arranged to take counsel with all those among our captains and soldiers whom we could depend on as wishing to advance, and it was decided that our departure should take place without delay. But there was a good deal of dissent expressed in camp about this decision, for some soldiers said that it was a very rash thing to go and enter into such a strong city, as we were so few in number, and they spoke of the very great strength of Montezuma. Our Captain Cortez replied that there was now no other course open to us, for we had constantly asserted and proclaimed that we were going to see Montezuma, so that the other counsels were useless. When Xicotenga and Maziascazi, the lords of Tlaxcala, saw that we were determined to go to Mexico, their spirits were weighed down, and they were constantly with Cortez, advising him not to enter on such an undertaking. Our captain said to them that he thanked the caciques for their good counsel, and he showed them much affection, and made them many promises, and he gave his presents to Xicotenga the elder, and to Maziascazi, and most of the other caciques, a great part of the fine cloth which Montezuma had presented, and told them that it would be a good thing to make peace between them and the Mexicans, so that they should become friends, and they could then obtain salt and cotton and other merchandise. Xicotenga replied that peace was useless, and that enmity was deeply rooted in their hearts, for such were the Mexicans that, under cover of peace, they would only be guilty of greater treachery, for they never told the truth in anything that they promised, and that he was not to trouble about saying more on the subject, that they could only again implore us to take care not to fall into the hands of such bad people. We went on to talk about the road which we should take to reach Mexico, for the ambassadors from Montezuma, who remained with us and were to be our guides, said that the most level and the best road was by the city of Cholula, where the people were vassals of Montezuma, and there we should receive proper attention. To all of us this appeared to be good advice, that we should go by that city. When, however, the caciques of Tlaxcala heard that we wished to go by a road which the Mexicans were choosing for us, they became very sorrowful, and begged us in any case to go by Huitotzingo, where the people were their relations and our friends, and not by way of Cholula, for in Cholula Montezuma always kept his double dealings concealed. For all that they talked and advised us not to enter into that city, our captain, in accordance with our counsel which had been well talked over, still determined to go by Cholula, on the one hand, because all agreed that it was a large town and well furnished with towers, and fine and tall quays, and situated on a beautiful plain, and on the other hand, because it was almost surrounded by other considerable towns, and could provide ample supplies, and our friends of Tlaxcala were near at hand. We intended to stay there until we could decide how to get to Mexico without having to fight for it, for the great power of the Mexicans was a thing to be feared, and unless God our Lord, by his divine mercy, which always helped us and gave us strength, should first of all so provide, we could not enter Mexico in any other manner. After much discussion, it was settled that we should take the road by Cholula, and Cortez at once sent messengers to ask the people of Cholula how it happened that, being so near to us, they had not come to visit us and pay that respect which was due to us as the messengers of so great a prince as the king who had sent us to the country to tell them of their salvation. He then requested all the caciques and priests of that city to come and see us, and give their fealty to our lord and king, and if they did not come, he would look upon them as ill-disposed towards us. While Cortez was talking to us all and to the caciques of Tlaxcala about our departure and about warfare, they came to tell him that 4 ambassadors, all 4 chieftains who were bringing presents, had arrived in the town. Cortez ordered them to be called, and when they came before him they paid the greatest reverence to him, and to all us soldiers who were there with him, and presented their gift of rich jewels of gold and many sorts of workmanship, well worth $2,000, and 10 loads of cloth beautifully embroidered with feathers. Cortez received them most graciously, and the ambassadors said on behalf of their lord Montezuma that he greatly wondered that we should stay so many days among a people who were so poor and ill-bred, who were so wicked, and such traitors and thieves that they were not fit even to be slaves, and that whenever by day or by night we were most off our guard, they would kill us in order to rob us, that he begged us to come at once to his city, and he would give us all that he possessed, although it would not be as much as we deserved or he would like to give, and that although all the supplies had to be carried into the city, he would provide for us as well as he was able. Montezuma did this so as to get us out of Tlaxcala, for he knew of the friendship we had made, and how, to perfect it, the Tlaxcalans had given their daughters to Malinche, and the Mexicans fully understood that our confederation could bring no good to them. Cortez thanked the messengers with many caressing expressions and signs of affection, and gave as his answer that he would go very soon to see their lord Montezuma, and he begged them to remain a few days with us. At that time Cortez decided that 2 of our captains should go and speak to the great Montezuma, and see the great city of Mexico, and Pedro de Alvarado and Bernardino Vasquez de Tapia had already set out on the journey, accompanied by some of the ambassadors of the great Montezuma, who were used to being with us, and the 4 ambassadors who had brought the present remained with us as hostages. However, we did not think it well advised, so he wrote to them telling them to return at once. The ambassadors with whom they had been traveling gave an account of their doings to Montezuma, and he asked them what sort of faces and general appearance had these 2 Teules who were coming to Mexico, and whether they were captains, and it seems that they replied that Pedro de Alvarado was of a very perfect grace, both in face and person, that he looked like the sun, and that he was a captain, and in addition to this they brought with them a picture of him with his face very naturally portrayed, and from that time forth they gave him the name of Tonatiuh, which means the sun, or the child of the sun, and so they called him ever after. Of Bernardino Vasquez de Tapia they said that he was a robust man, and of a very pleasant disposition, and that he also was a captain, and Montezuma was much disappointed that they had turned back again. I have already said how our captain sent messengers to Cholula to tell the caciques of that city to come and see us at Tlaxcala. When the caciques understood what Cortez ordered them to do, they thought that it would be sufficient to send 4 unimportant Indians to make their excuses. The caciques of Tlaxcala were present when these messengers arrived, and they said to our captain that the people of Cholula had sent those Indians to make a mock of him, and of all of us, for they were only commoners of no standing. So Cortez at once sent them back with 4 other Zempoala Indians to tell the people of Cholula that they must send some chieftains, and as the distance was only 5 leagues, that they must arrive within 3 days, otherwise we should look on them as rebels, that when they came he wished to receive them as friends and brothers, as he had received their neighbors and people of Tlaxcala, and that if they did not wish for our friendship, that we should take measures which would displease them and anger them. When the caciques of Cholula had listened to that embassy, they answered that they were not coming to Tlaxcala, for the Tlaxcalans were their enemies, and they knew that they, the Tlaxcalans, had said many evil things about them, and about their lord Montezuma, that it was for us to come to their city and to leave the conflicts to Tlaxcala, and that then, if they did not do what they ought to do, we could treat them as such as we had sent to say they were. When our captain saw that the excuse that they had made was a just one, we resolved to go to Cholula, and as soon as the caciques of Tlaxcala perceived that we were determined to go there, they said to Cortez, "So you wish to trust to the Mexicans, and not to us who are your friends? We have already told you many times that you must beware of the people of Cholula, and of the power of Mexico, and so that you can receive all the support possible from us, we have got ready 10,000 warriors to accompany you." Cortez thanked them very heartily for this, but after consultation with all of us, it was agreed that it would not be advisable to take so many warriors to a country in which we were seeking friends, and that it would be better to take only 1,000, and this number we asked of the Tlaxcalans, and said that the rest should remain in their houses.